Is this actually gonna start? Why is this not? I swear to God, if this thing starts fighting with me, I'm gonna.
Avengers!
I'm not editing that out. No,
Please
the
don't.
damn record. Yeah, the recording was fighting with me, and that's how it is. As you can tell, since Alex is hosting, that means Josh is out. Unfortunately, Josh is injured again, and not just injured emotionally, but physically injured, and not. And I will say we're sparing him the emotional pain of seeing this movie we're going to review. So I'm bringing another person who's been down and out, who's been just slugging it through and watching some painful things. Justin from the movie Wire, how are you?
Alex, thanks for having me. But again, without our host of honor, I would say. I think he has somebody that pays him just to like kick his ass before I come onto the show.
Yeah, I'm starting to think things like, okay, this is the lineup. This is who I get. This is who I'm guesting with. This is who I'm bringing on. This is who I want to go on. And he sees your name pop up, and he's like, "What can happen to me?" It's an unsubstantiated rumor, but currently, what I've heard through the grapevine is that he saw your name pop up, went to a dive bar to the biggest guy he could, and just said, "The Packers suck." And since he's in Illinois, that was like 3 days in traction, and he's finally out of the ICU.
Man, I should have used that one instead of watching this movie we're about to talk about too. But how are you, Alex? It's been a bit.
It has been a bit, and I'm doing pretty good. I'm uh, a home renovation project is slowly getting done. I had my little brother. He's significantly younger than me. He came out for a little while, and we actually spent a whole week together. Went to Chicago a few times. Did all the touristy things. My mom had one request: is that since we're going to the Museum of Art, that we go and see the giant Ferris Bueller poster that Cameron gets stuck in front of, kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we could not recreate those photos because there was like 70 other people there.
I don't blame him. I would want to do that too.
Yeah. What about you? What is going good with your life right now?
Ah, well, it's the movies have been kind of rough so far in the last couple of months as we've had those conversations. Right now, we're halfway through the year, and I just released my halfway mid mark episode. And I'm telling you, it's a little rough so far this year, but it's been trying to dig through a lot of dumpsters to try and find that gold movie so far this year.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to make your week a little bit brighter, but I will tell you what can make your week brighter,
Oh, do
and
tell.
that is the super familiar with the Wilsons. So I'd like you to listen to this ad bump, and then we'll get back to Indiana Jones and why did they make this.
The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. You know that family whose house you hung out in when you were a kid? The house was a little loud and chaotic, but always fun, and sometimes felt more home than home. Well, that's us.
We're the Wilsons, and we welcome you into our podcast with silly chat, ridiculous games, and interviews with interesting people.
Like a spin doctor. The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast.
Welcome home.
And we're back. Justin, you know that for a long time now, roughly 15 years, Josh and I have had this ongoing joke that there's only three Indiana Jones movies. If you paid attention to any of our social, anytime there's news about it, I always say, oh, they're making a fourth indie movie, which is great because occasionally Josh and I get that little bait bite, and it's just so thrilling when someone's like, guys, there was, there was a crystal skull, and I'm like, a few years back, well, I'm sorting for the same company but different job. It was they had a forums where people would post deals on, any deals they found, and anytime the Indiana Jones collection came up, people of course would have snarky responses. And as that collection gathered, the Crystal Skull, my favorite thing anyone ever said was, "This is finally a great deal on three movies and a coaster."
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've seen your discussions on the Crystal Skull, and I don't know if we want to even get into that one right now. I'm sure we'll. I'm following your lead at this point,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure you're not going to like my viewpoint on that one.
I want to go in hot, but I want a little bit of happiness first. So,
Got it.
a quick thing. Indiana Jones famously came about in 1981 with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven Spielberg, he was trying to get a James Bond movie. He apparently had pitched himself to the Broccoli's a few times during the Roger Moore, but they were just like, So he and Lucas kind of took a little trip together, brainstormed, and said, we can make our own kind of spy thing, but they also loved the serials of the 30s and 40s. Now, children, in the 30s and 40s during the Great Depression, movies used to be places you would go to get away. You would go and you would see the daily news. You would go there, you would have your popcorn, you would see some shorts, you would see Bugs Bunny and Daphne, and you would see Mickey Mouse stuff, and then you would see a movie. If it was a longer movie, like an hour and a half to 2 hours, they would put an intermission, and then they'd have some stuff happen. Typically some other little shorts, and that's actually where Batman got his first adventures. You can actually find them. I believe they're mostly public domain now. You can find Batman shorts, live action ones. They're like 5 to 10 minutes long. Most famous now that probably has any lingering presence is the Three Stooges. People still know them, and that's what those Three Stooges were. They're between 8 to sometimes 20 minutes long. They're either before a movie, sometimes in the middle, and they were so popular. People would actually go to a movie because they knew a new Three Stooges was coming out. It'd be kind of like there's a few times, but there's a few movies that overperformed at the box office, and it's because people went to see the trailer for a movie. Most famously is, I don't remember the movie, but it was the Phantom Menace trailer. In some movie that it got put in front of, made like 30 million. They only projected it like 10, and then the next weekend it made nothing. But we got Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was supposed to be Tom Selleck, but he couldn't get out of his movie contract. I mean, his TV show contract. I believe he was doing not Miami Vice, Magnum PI,
MPI.
and they wouldn't let him out of it to film it. They went with Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford nailed that. Great rip roaring movie. I saw it 3 or 4 weeks ago. I actually saw it in theaters for the first time. Fathom Events had a one night only, one showing, 7 o'clock. My friend and I went. It's the 4K restoration, and maybe there was maybe 30 of us in the theater.
Oh.
It was beautiful. Have you ever seen it actually like on a big screen in theaters, Raiders?
So they did a release years and years ago of that, but again, not to the quality we have theaters now.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if they re-release it now, I didn't have that event up here that I saw. That would be amazing to see on the
Oh
big
yeah.
screen nowadays. So I haven't seen it on the big screen since all the theater upgrades. So that would be an incredible experience.
Oh, it was charming because it's so clear. You see how gritty it is. Like
Hmm.
I didn't realize how buggy that movie is. Like Harrison Ford standing there with like the bazooka towards the end, and you can see flies like crawling down his face, landing on his knuckles and stuff like that. Don't really see anything that breaks immersion other than like once or twice, like Indy's on front of a vehicle, and the vehicle, the grill is collapsing, and he's starting to go under. You can kind of see that when he's straddling the wheel while holding on the grill. You saw there's a little harness he's on, the stunt guy was on. When being dragged underneath the vehicle, there's a little tunnel they dug, but it really doesn't break the immersion. It's more like, okay, yeah, because it's that big and that clear, but it still just works.
Yeah, well, and here's what's special about the Indiana Jones movie is you used a lot of practical effects back then, and
Hmm.
even today, you don't hear a lot of that didn't age well, or because it is a great story, it is great performances. It is going to be gritty, it's going to be a little bit raw on the side, but the story is so good, the characters are so good that you just ignore everything else in it. And that is what's amazing about the Indiana Jones films in the 80s is that you can pick apart that doesn't look good, but it's more of an
Yeah.
appreciation of how they did it and how they developed the characters for all three of the movies in unison.
Yeah. What did you think of Temple of Doom? That one, I don't think I was the right age to like see that movie because I saw since I was born in the mid '80s. I kind of all saw them in the 90s when I was younger. So Raiders was just like, oh, Han Solo's in something. This is so good. And then Temple of Doom, I mean, kind of got some laughs out there, but I always knew that something was a little off with the tone.
The tone was different, and you got to think this Raiders was a huge success for that type of movie. And when you go into Temple of Doom, that was the big blockbuster sequel that they increased the budget. Obviously, they had a bigger, brighter script that poked a little bit more fun. They had more fun with it because they earned that. Temple of Doom was more commercial to fill seats based on the sequel to give audiences what they wanted. It's definitely not one of my favorites, but I will say it is one of the more entertaining ones if you're looking for an Indiana Jones just popcorn flick. Pacing on it is rides more like a blockbuster than the Raiders and Last Crusade. But there is definitely, you're absolutely right, a very specific tone difference to it.
Yeah, and it's famously was made while both Harrison and I'm not Harrison, while Lucas and Spielberg were both going through divorce. So that's why the main female character, whose name I still am forgetting, why she came off as a little Willie. That's right, Willie Scott. Why she came off as a little shrill.
Hmm.
But you famously do get Short Round, his sidekick, Ki Hu Wan, who is having such a resurgence in the last year and a half
Hmm.
with
Yep.
Everything Everywhere All at Once and his Oscar win, which is well deserved. And then was it the Chinese Born American? I think is that the Disney Plus show that he
Yes.
did.
Yes.
Yeah, American Born Chinese, which binged that with my wife, and what an incredible and interesting show that was. But other than that, like the only thing that I find interesting is that if you go back and watch Temple of Doom, Harrison very early in the filming of it injured his back. And
Yeah.
so he was out for about a month and a half, and but they kept filming because his stand-in looked so much like him, same height, build, his stunt double as well. Just they look remarkably similar. That Spielberg said unless you have a shot directly on face shot of Indy, it's almost certainly the stunt double because even like the
Mm.
profile shots of the side of the face, and having like a few years back read that and then watching it, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like dubbing here.
You can say that about the new one too. But
Mm.
okay, I'll hold off. But
Yeah.
you also look, and you made a good point though. You take Lucas and Spielberg that were going through divorces because Temple of Doom had a darker tone. And keep
Mhm.
in mind, this was during the time that people had a big question mark of the rating system, violence in movies. There was this huge censorship of what's appropriate for what age. So, and there's a huge history between this era when Temple of Doom came out to the PG-13 rating. And when we get to the climax or the last act of Temple of Doom, it's it's significantly more violent than the other movies that we'll see. And it
Mhm.
really resonates with that dark tone of the creator on how artists really reflect their work into their screenplay or to their vision of a movie. It's a direct reflection. And that is, to your point, a very good point to a tone difference in that Indiana Jones, that hero aspect. We see him in a different
Yeah.
light.
Isn't the other famous story that because of this movie we got PG-13?
It was a combinations. You had Temple of Doom, you had Gremlins. So a lot of these
Ah, Gremlins.
movies really raise that question of the rating. So, I mean, you can take a handful of these movies within these couple of years, and these have a huge significance to the rating system history. But what is a kind of a shame to me, but it's not a shame to me, they're all fantastic movies,
Oh yes.
is these are the ones that get the most attention just because they kind of change the way we see movies nowadays, not necessarily because of the actual picture itself, but because they had the most exposure out there.
Gremlins, another Spielberg produced film.
Right.
And then they took 5 years off because there's only 3 years between Raiders and Temple. And then we got 5 years later, we got Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, which we had a young River Phoenix. Unfortunately, he
Hmm.
passed away only a few years later, so he was always young. But we got that really just nice beginning, about 15, 20-minute intro, which really. I don't know why that intro I give such a pass to, but something like the Solo movie.
Hmm.
Oh, that's where he got the jacket. That's where he got Chewbacca. That's where he got the gun. That's where he got his last name. Ah, thank you. We're explaining all that. This movie explains all that. His name's actually not Indiana.
The
That's where
dog.
he got the hat. That's where he got the scar. That's where he picked up, started figuring out how to use a whip kind of thing. He's always been this kind of like, he's literally a Boy Scout,
Hmm.
you know. But that first 15 minutes just so works.
Yeah, it does. And what I really enjoyed about that, you can take the Indiana Jones lookalike or whatever it may be, that the guy who's stealing the
Oh
artifact in
yeah.
the beginning, and you
Mhm.
can. It is so easy to make him just the villain. It's easy to make him the bad guy and kind of spider web the story around that. But you don't hate him. He actually ends his relationship with Indy almost on a positive note, even though Indy loses. And it's almost an inspiration. If that character came in and treated his character as a villain or treated Indy horribly, would we have
Mhm.
gotten the Indiana Jones that we got? Or did this character actually inspire based on the situational and based on how the situation was handled afterwards? It works because the characters are likable. It works
Mhm.
because it has that sense of adventure that not everybody that is a bad guy, I would say.
That is Richard Young. He was a bit of a character actor in the 70s and 80s. That role is one of his last roles. Apparently he retired to become a photographer.
Wow.
I mean, he is the bad guy. They're chasing a kid, but that little parting of like, hey, like you tried hard, kid. And he gives him his hat and he puts it on,
It's a
and
beautiful
he's,
scene.
it's just it's well done. And even the brief introduction of Sean Connery as Henry Sr.
Yeah.
You don't see him. You see his hand. You see he's working on something. You get like Sean Connery telling him like count to 10 or count to 10 or 20. No, 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 in Greek. You know, it's great. And then I was actually rewatched that The Last Crusade over the weekend with my wife. This is Sean Connery post his 007 James Bond role, just after winning a supporting Oscar for The Untouchables.
Mm,
So I mean, this is still the height of his fame.
yeah.
He would crest down a little bit. I mean, he still had some big hits in the 90s. Obviously, The Rock, probably his last big hit, which is about 8 9 years later,
Hmm.
with a back when young Michael Bay, before he got all Bay,
Yeah.
which rumors apparently The Rock, random tangent, but on The Rock, apparently Sean Connery, which it's a Disney produced film.
Yeah.
At one point, they came down going like, "What are you guys doing with all this budget? What's with all these explosions? This is not what we approved." And Connery said like, "Let the young man do his fucking job," or something like that. But then also, Connery apparently would just straight up tell Michael Bay, he's not just going to shoot certain things. He's like, "I'm not going to do that," or like, "That is stupid," or something like that. So like, he kind of was like, he was the star. Nicolas Cage was on the rise, and the movie was probably so good because Sean Connery didn't take bullshit.
Well, and he doesn't take bullshit from a young, at that time, Bay was a young director.
Yeah,
And how can you say no to Sean Connery's accent? I mean, if you
yeah,
had a voice like that, you would totally just listen to everything he said.
yeah. And, he'd been doing, he's what the the Rock was maybe like what 35, 36 years in his career, something
Yeah.
like that. But anyways, he's only 12 years older than Harrison Ford, but he's playing the older gentleman. And it's such an interesting role because there are moments during The Last Crusade where Indy is not Indy,
Hmm.
and Sean Connery is not Sean Connery. Like one of my favorite scenes is, of course, the introduction comes in. They're using Nazis again. They're looking for the Holy Grail. Indy breaks into this room. He gets a vase smashed on his head. Turns out it's his dad. This is deep into the movie, like maybe an hour into a 2 hour movie, and there's Sean Connery, and he's just jovial remarking on like it's a fake. It's not like actually from the Ming Dynasty. Oh, this, and like, why would my son bring my notebook over here, calling him Junior, and he gets mad, and there's all these just. It's such against type for Sean Connery, and he's so endearing.
Well, if you look as the movie progresses, you have that first meet where it's awkward. it's realistic where you have this father and son. They don't know how to interact with each other. Harrison
Hmm.
Ford's still like that little boy that needs to act properly in front of his dad.
Yeah.
But then as it goes on and they have their adventure together, that father-son time, you notice a character change in Sean Connery where it's almost borderline goofy. Where
Yeah.
I remember the scene where he gets into the tank and he does that
Hmm.
secret handshake with what's his name, Percy, I believe it is. I
Yeah.
Yeah. And he just has this like new life to him. And you can tell that as they go on this adventure, they're discovering each other out and bringing out the best of their personalities. And that's how good the writing is in Last Crusade. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And there is, I don't know. Apparently, Connery ad libbed some of the lines and some of the stuff he did, like the famous line of like, it's like, Dad, how'd you know she was Nazi? She talks in her sleep. Apparently, that was like a just he just it was some other line, and he put that in there, and he had that little like mischievous grin. But when they get on the blimp, and Indy is trying to say, Dad, you ignored me, you let me do my own thing, and he's just like, well, I give you independence. I taught you self sufficiency. He's like, well, you never wanted to talk about anything. And he's like, okay, talk. And
yeah.
he gives like this kind of like bug eyed, kind of like, I'm giving you the floor. What do you want from me,
Mhm.
son? And Harrison is just, he just has nothing. There's just a blankness. And I really believe that is either the screenwriter, I think the screenwriter, Spielberg, Harrison Ford, and Connery probably have all had something conversation like that with their children where they just had a moment where like we never talk about real things. We're always talking about like what I'm doing in school or like who I'm going to go see or stuff like that. You never actually want to talk with me about anything important in my life other than schoolwork or something like that. And it's like, what do you want to talk about? Anything. Bring it up, kid. And you have nothing because you don't know what you want to talk about. You know you want to talk, but you don't know what you want to talk about.
Well, this, and I'm going to tie this in again because this is Spielberg at his almost best when it comes to storytelling. Because we got to remember, Spielberg grew up as a young Jewish boy in school. He had a home life where he wanted to be a filmmaker, which wasn't the most popular decision back then.
Yeah.
And you take the acceptance. He Families are the ones, human nature, we want to please. We want to please our parents. We want to please those that teach us. And you look at that blimp scene, and that's what Jones is really looking for is that acceptance. How do you ask a father that raised you is more that raised you more strict that you just want to be accepted? You want your father to say, I accept you, I love you, I'm proud of you. And this
Mm.
is kind of the feelings we see from Spielberg adding his own touch to it. And this is the beauty of that in that writing is that you have to read between the lines of relatability. And I think this is one of the magic touches in the storytelling and what makes this so special is the subtle piece of it that gets into your psyche that really gets the audience to relate to it.
Oh, I completely agree. I think you were just so right about that. I, I'm still entranced by the ending where because it's not like big blockbustery. There's not a minecart ride. There is not like the standoff with you have the bazooka and then we're gonna blow up the ark and the ark is all melting. Everybody's it's just they have to solve a puzzle and I love so much that they're on the blimp and they're going and they're like, what do these mean? It's like we don't know. But then they do this beautiful juxtaposition of cutting back and forth between the wounded Sean Connery, who was just shot, Henry Senior, talking them out while Indy's thinking them aloud, and they're both coming to the same conclusions,
Yeah.
meaning that either one of them probably would have solved this, but it's because they both know it so well, they're both ingrained with this history that even though they're apart, they're solving it together,
Hmm.
and it's just beautiful. The right the Pentaman kneels before God, and then it's like, but Jehovah starts with a J. The whole yeah.
What?
Anyway,
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
so beautiful.
when it comes to like Last Crusade was the first movie I was taught in film lit. This one holds a special place to me because to me it's one of my favorites because it's so meaningful. It has a stronger message. It kind of takes what we have from the first two movies and integrates it into a nice finale. where we do have the crowd pleasing ending that just feels good. It's emotional, it's action, it has everything you would want from an Indiana Jones movie, but it adds 10 times the heart that we got from Temple of Doom. So
Hmm.
The Last Crusade is ultimately my favorite movie just because it's a
Yeah.
perfect summary of the other two.
Now, I think of all the movies, it is. I mean, I think objectively, you could say Raiders is stronger.
Yeah.
It is tighter. It has more of an impact. I mean, how often has that ending been spoofed with top men, you know, in the big warehouse? But it's just a lovely movie, and I love the ending so much.
Riding out to the sunset, all
Yeah, right after
it was
sunset,
great.
you find out that he's like, why do you keep calling him Junior? Because he's Henry Jones Jr. It's like the dog was called Indiana, which is another thing. Any movie filmed nowadays, with that beginning, with when he goes into the young River Phoenix goes into the house, pets the dog,
Yep.
somebody would like slow down. Some prop designer, whatever, would have had the collar. The collar would have said Indiana, or something like that. And someone's like, "Well, they told us at the beginning of the movie or something." No, you don't see that. He just comes in, he just rubs the dog's head. You don't even really see a neck or, I mean, the full body, and scruffs the dog's head, and that's the callback of when you go like, oh yeah, there was a dog at the beginning of the movie.
I want to say how special that beginning is really quick. We're taking a 1989, 8 years, I believe, after the original Raiders. It has to, almost a decade later, it has to touch the new generation. And what I really appreciate about that is that we did get a spinoff of young Indiana Jones in a TV series,
Yes.
which to me, I religiously watch that show. And I think it's on
Mm-hmm.
Disney Plus now, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Oh, I did not know that.
and it's one of those that maybe doesn't age as well as the first season, absolutely. But it is there for the younger generation to be introduced to the Indiana Jones and to really get excited about watching the older stuff. And that's what I loved about that beginning is that it really did translate into really touching the new generation of Indiana Jones fans.
Oh, certainly. I have just nothing to say because that's just all so true.
Yeah, it's a great show.
So we jump ahead 18, 19 years, 19 years, and they bring back Indiana Jones with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, I have two of my favorite movie going experiences within this time frame, within about 5 year time frame. One of them I will, if I ever convince you to, whenever they announce whoever the new James Bond's going to be, you and I will do a James Bond retrospective, go through like most of the movies, and I will tell you my favorite movie theater James Bond experience, which involves
Oh, I can't
my
wait.
wife. But this one, I will say, is my second favorite because, so leading up to it, Indiana Jones was pre CGI. His outfit is famously in the Smithsonian. They had to go to the Smithsonian and say, "Can we please have the jacket, hat, and whip back, please?" And the Smithsonian's like, "Don't damage this crap." There were rumors that the whip was all going to be digital because Harrison's in his 60s and like insurance writers and blah 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 blah. Spielberg was like, "Listen, I promise, guys, we're going to use digital very very discreetly, only when necessary." And it starts off with the CGI gopher popping out of the Paramount Hill, and then some stuff happens. We get it like there's a chase, there's a raid. It's the Russians this time. You see the Ark of the Covenant briefly, little teaser thing, and then the nuke the fridge as the famous meme happens. And I remember I thought to myself as the atom bomb is exploding, I'm like, and Indiana Jones is there. That's actually a very beautiful shot.
Hmm.
It's a cinema. It's a ushering Indiana into the nuclear age kind of thing.
Yeah.
But between the jokes and the cracks and the tease and the bad CGI and all this crap, I'm livid. I'm pulsing with anger. I haven't said anything, but I'm pulsing with anger. And as the nuclear bomb explosion is happening and the mushroom cloud and that beautiful shot, my wife touches my shoulder and says, "It's going to be okay. It's just a movie." She apparently could feel my rage vibrating out of my body.
have a visual of you just clenching the armrest, ready to get up. Just
Oh, oh, that I will say that movie is not without merit. I think there's actually some wonderfully done scenes. I think there are some good chase sequences. There's some good music. I just don't. I don't think that you can put lightning back in a bottle after 20 years.
yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, here's my take. Well, first, let me get into this. I'm going to
Hmm.
quote one of my favorites, Roger
Yeah,
Ebert, in his review.
yeah.
He gave it 3.5 stars.
Hmm.
So now his point, and I think we can all relate to this because we've all have kind of reviewed films this way. You take movies that come out a decade or more later, they are more unsuccessful than successful. I mean, it, we have over a decade to get our hopes up to prepare to create our own vision of what this movie would be. And he compared it to like eating 4 pounds of sausage. How do you
Oh yeah,
compare the first pound to the last pound? Obviously, you're
yeah.
digesting the first whole pound of sausage. You go to the second pound, it's not going to feel as good. The third pound, and by the fourth pound, you have this expectation of what it should taste like. But at the end of the day, you are just miserable because you're full of sausage. So,
God, I love Ebert.
but he's accurate in that aspect. And
Yeah.
when we talk the evolution of film, this is the time where we had a lot of cheesy movies. We had a lot of times where we have to have that big summer blockbuster. We had to appease everybody, and they weren't out to necessarily appease the Indiana Jones fans. They had to have a plan for the next generation and somewhat satisfy the old Indiana Jones fans. Now, where this failed is they force fed the audience what they really didn't across the board. Hinted at Mutt by Shia LaBeouf to potentially replace Harrison Ford, which
Hmm.
is an impossible feat to do, and you will never prove that to any Indiana Jones fan that that's possible.
Right.
And Shia LaBeouf is at the bottom of the barrel of anybody I would even consider to replacing Harrison Ford.
Hmm.
And it's one of those that it didn't have the same tone. We talked about Temple of Doom. It didn't have the same tone. This one reminded me of 1993's Matinee, where you're going to the theater. The tone is similar, but you're going to the theater to see that cheesy movie full of fighting, sword fighting, flying or swinging monkeys. You're in the woods swinging from vines with monkeys, fire ants. This is the movie at that time that pleased Spielberg and wanted to please the audience as well, because it is that definition of the cheesy 40s, 50s serial movies like
Yeah.
Jungle Raiders, King Solomon's Mine, Secret of Incas. This went out to solve two separate generations, and this is what people had a problem with. And my last point, because I know you want to say something to this, Alex, is the fact we take Phantom Menace. I was a projectionist at that time. When Phantom
Oh.
Menace came out, I can tell you, every day for a month it was sold out showings. And at
Hmm.
that time, the reactions were positive. But when
Hmm.
people festered on it and online came about with popularity, that's when people started to talk about the flaws and all that. But Crystal Skull at that time did have more positive than negatives.
Hmm.
But now that we get into the nitty gritties of it, that's kind of where we have problems with it. And society really contributes to that too. There are flaws in Crystal Skull. Don't
Oh
get me
yeah.
wrong. But to me, it did the job that it exactly intended. But one, the ending killed it, and two, Shia
Yeah.
LaBeouf killed it.
My main problem with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is actually I think you nailed it pretty well. Is that it had to solve two things, and it kind of half solved both.
Yeah,
Which I do kind of wonder because, all right, so we have Qui-Gon Jinn. What is that actor's name? I'm forgetting off the top of my
Liam
head.
Neeson.
We have Liam Neeson, who's in his
Mhm.
60s, who's doing action flicks, and for the most part, it's like he's still buying it. And
Yeah.
Harrison Ford, when they filmed this movie, was 64, 65, something like that. But of course, it was like, well, you're 64, 65. But I mean, Harrison Ford has put a lot of years on
Yeah.
himself. Famously with he likes a horseback ride. He has helicopters, he has planes, he's crashed his plane repeatedly. You know, He's never been a super ripped guy. He's just always been a kind of lanky, fit guy. So, maybe that has something to do with it. Don't know what his personal party lifestyle is, but he's got some mileage on him.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if maybe they would have just treated it more like, no, he's just going to still do his stuff versus some of the jokes. I don't know, but my main problem with Crystal Skull is just the ending. Like
Yeah.
it goes too far
It really
with
does.
the pyramid, and yes, there's aliens and they're merging and blah blah blah, blah all that stuff. I've returned to it maybe once or twice. I don't have a nostalgic love for it. But like you said with the Phantom Menace, I like the Phantom Menace.
Hmm.
It came out. I loved it. I started my dislike of the prequels really started with the Clone Wars, where I'm just kind of like, this is weird. Like,
Yeah.
to me, the math, it didn't work up for the Clone Wars. Like, oh, we have 500,000 clones with another million or two on the way. I'm like, you got like 75 billion star systems, and you're thinking you're gonna solve the war with 1 million clones? Like, you're
Yeah.
gonna need like 10 to take a planet. Just some of the math wasn't working. Some of the weirdness of kind of things don't work out for me. Especially, it's like, isn't Coruscant like an entire planet that's an entire city? Isn't there like 300 billion people on that? Like, you're gonna 1 million, And I saw that opening weekend, and then like, what is it, the second or third week commercials on TV were Huda Man, Yoda Man showing
Oh god.
Yoda with his lightsaber.
Yes.
I
I
think
think
that
Pepsi
was
had a field day with that one.
yeah. I think when I was a because I was a teenager at that time, I think I was like, ooh, this is cringy. This is not good. But I saw Revenge of the Sith
Yeah.
in theaters. I loved it. So I don't have a disdain for them. I have a mild disdain for Crystal Skull just because it never there was no satisfaction for me in what I
Yeah.
was seeing.
Yeah.
Love Clay Blanchett though. She did a great job.
She did. And it's one of those that I will literally turn off the ending. I'll watch the entire thing because to its I hate to say defense because I'll probably get flack for that, but it is an entertaining movie for
Yeah.
the most part. Me personally, do I consider it part of the Indiana Jones original trilogy? No, I like to
No.
view it as an original, just silly, 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 fun popcorn flick. That if you watch it all the way up to the last 15 minutes, it's a decent watch when it comes to pure, just silly entertainment.
All right. Justin, I
Alex,
waited 15 years. They give us another one.
shit.
I'm gonna. This is just full spoilers because I'm angry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go down. I have a few problems, and this is just gonna lay it out flat.
Here we go.
They spent 300 million on this damn movie. They spent 25 minutes of the movie, which I'm assuming is like 50 million of the budget, de-aging Harrison Ford to 1945. I'm assuming that because it's feedback of the people who are like, well, Indy, like they kind of hinted that in Crystal Skull that he did all that crazy crap during the 40s with the Nazis. Why didn't we get that movie? Blah 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 blah. First off, if they're going to make an Indiana Jones movie, they should just make Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. That is an amazing video game. This fantastic video game. The plot is amazing. It won prizes for its plot, for its graphics, and has been continuously in production. That's its own thing. Or hell, fuck it. Just give us one of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles adventures. You already de-aged him for 25 minutes. If you can de-age him for 25 minutes, and you can de-age Samuel L. Jackson for an entire Miss Marvel movie, or Captain Marvel movie, you can do it for Harrison Ford. Now, here's my problem for the first 25 minutes. 80-year-old Harrison Ford does not fucking sound like 40-year-old Harrison Ford. And that pisses me off. Anytime that he wasn't shouting something, which, it was the gravelly, grumbly, I've had 6 scotches in this morning for breakfast voice, and it pissed me off because that broke my immersion. But then, on top of all of that, they apparently decided to do a 90s render cutscene of him running across a train in the dark. You're filming in the dark to hide how bad the CGI is. Why does it look like it was the 1997 Titanic deck scene as they're sailing out of the ocean, which Cameron refuses to update the graphics, which, were good at the time, but look like crap now, of stick figures walking across the top of But on top of all that, I love Mads Mikkelsen. He makes
Yes.
my heart sing. He is Hannibal. He can eat me anytime he wants. I'm fine with that.
Please turn that into a song.
But he took a fucking pipe to the face from a watershed on the top on a high-speed train and is alive? How is he alive? I've seen that people have snipped that moment from the and put it online of like how. When he came back, I was like, oh wow, Mads is actually okay. I guess he's not the villain for this thing. He just took a fucking thing to the face at 75 miles an hour straight to it. Okay. Oh, he's alive. Okay. Do you have a brother? Is this a clone? Are they doing a clone one? Are they going back in time? They're going back in time to bring Mads back to life. His clone brother, his twin brother, is going back in time because his brother was actually the good scientist, but it was actually really good at his job. But no, it's actually.
Breathe, breathe, Alex. We'll get through it. We got
And
this.
then Disney knows only one thing to do with a person who is a hero above the age of 50. You're a drunk, destitute piece of shit. Luke Skywalker apparently, after defeating the Empire, gets scared of his nephew and tries to kill him. Cuts himself off in the Force and won't even show up to a fight at the end of a movie. Han Solo gets Princess Leia pregnant and realizes alimony and child support are easy to ignore if you're a smuggler and take off. Indiana Jones apparently pisses off his 30-year-old son so much that his son joins the army, walks into a hail of gunfire bullets, and causes a divorce. So much so that as we have seen in movie 1, movie 2, movie 3, and movie 4, he is a great professor. People love it. In fact, the first movie, his students have "I love you" written across
on the eyelids.
on the eyelids. What is it? The third movie, like he actually has to escape out of a window because people want to see him so much. But no, this one, the class is empty. No one is paying attention. Apparently, the finals are like tomorrow. No one's paying attention.
Okay, Alex. So,
Please
well,
talk, Justin.
so let's look at this. All right. So I'll start off on a positive because everything else is probably going to be negative. So, uh, so I can see the classroom scene. I did appreciate because that's the fallen
How
hero.
dare you?
That's the fallen hero aspect of it, and it's done poorly, but at least they're shoving it in there. And then we take him being grumpy, quieting the neighbors down from the loud music. I mean,
That
they're
was
trying.
funny.
That was pretty funny, and they're trying to create this new character so everybody can adjust to him. And it's not the other way around. They're not going to keep. They already know there's no way they're going to portray Harrison Ford as the same ball of energy we had. So they're trying to adjust the audience for us to cater to them. And that's what I really had a problem with, even though I did appreciate how they executed the classroom with the fallen hero and how things changed. I think it, I, it's a hit or miss. I think it was lazy, but I think it was done pretty well in that classroom scene. But I think they tried to do it too hard and they worked too hard to get that message across. Um, but you're right. We went from a crescendo through the original trilogy, and now we have Grumpy Old Man. And I like the fact that you brought up the de-aging. So the de-aging, again, for what it was, I thought they did an okay on the visual of it, but the audio was just so off. It's like, what is the point? Just why don't you just splice scenes together from the previous films and do it that way? Because the audio is so noticeably off. It's like, I don't know. I started piecing it together in my head watching it. I'm like, well, maybe it's because he drank from the Holy Grail. Maybe maybe his voice changed, but his body doesn't. I don't know. I was trying to justify it.
When Lucasfilm had Mark Hamill come back for Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian, Mark Hamill's talked about how he was he was there on set, blah blah blah, body doubles, etc., all this crap. But to make his voice match, what apparently they did is they had him speak, then they put with a processor, they got all his audio from the original trilogy, and then they had the processor kind of blend them.
Mm.
So
Okay.
they use like some matching software, and that's why he sounds like him, a young version of himself. It's him, but they've pitched things and blended it and blah blah blah. You have $300 million and you can't afford to do that with Harrison Ford.
So they ran out of money, is what you're saying?
Get some working girl Harrison Ford. Get some clear and present danger Harrison Ford audio. Make that shit work.
Well, it's sad because this is supposed to be, and it kicks us off on the wrong foot on this, because this is supposed to be a celebratory grand finale exit to Harrison Ford, and it feels like I'm going to a stranger's funeral from start to finish, where it just
Damn.
well, it's like right when we first see Indiana Jones, okay, we're going on an adventure, then you see Indiana Jones, then he just talks, and it's just like not the same guy, and then we see him in person old, and you're like, what happened when you were young? I miss that. And now you just look like you don't want to be there. You want to go home and take a nap, and then I don't know. I could say more offensive things, but I'm trying to hold myself.
I All right, so so the plot of this movie I'm actually mostly okay with. It is a kitchen sink movie. You have the tall,
Hmm.
brooding Nazi. You have the Nazis back. You have the tall, super muscular Nazi. You have the travel by map thing. You have we're going like three or four different places. We have a car chase. We have a motorcycle chase. We have a train chase. We have the boat sequence. We have beautiful locales. We have the MacGuffin that you're chasing being stolen and panned back and handed back and stolen, and you're solving puzzles. You're going through caverns, callbacks to history. There's so much of it that is just on the surface it should work, but I now understand James Mangold, the director. I now understand his crux.
Hmm.
Crutch, whatever. What he doesn't do well,
Yeah.
and that's action.
Yeah.
Like he had two movies. He had the Wolverine, and then he had Wolverine Origins, which now Ford versus Ferrari is fantastic.
Yeah.
He can film cars very well.
Yeah.
Okay, he can film a car, but when it comes to actually filming people, he can't do it. Like I remember watching Logan in theaters, and there were the fight scenes were mostly good. Blah blah blah. Worked within the limitations. He's supposed to be an old man. But at the end, I love the sequence with X-13 where they're first capturing her, and I was like, oh my god, they're not holding back. They just shot a 13-year-old girl with a spear through the chest, and they showed it. I was like, damn. But then that never came back. Like the end fight of Wolverine on X-23, they held back. Like he just chucked her away a
Yeah.
few times. I'm like, why don't you show claws going into her? Why don't you? I mean, our Wolverine just de-aged and went hulking, and I heard that scream where he bells out, and you're finally seeing the berserker Wolverine running through the forest, slicing people, and then he holds back. He doesn't know how to unrestrain himself. And that is what I felt through these like 95 different overly long action sequences, which is that he doesn't know how to film people being kinetic. He can film the cars being kinetic. He can film the motorcycle being kinetic. But when it came to the people moving within the pieces, I never felt that he could really encapsulate what the energy of the moment was. And in when Spielberg has the camera, he knows, yes, the action is secondary to the people's movements. This one, it's like, oh yeah, that car is still going. Oh yeah, you ran down some stairs. These pieces were missing humanity.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Now, with Mangold, he is a very structured director. So
Hmm.
he has his style all the way from, I think his first movie was Copland with Sylvester Stallone, if I remember correctly. And you get a lot of that same tone here when it comes to it. So there's very little distinction between all of his movies. The story is going to be different, the effects are going to be different, but the style he shoots is very much the same. Now, when we take Spielberg, and Indiana Jones was meant for Spielberg, this was the type of style and storytelling that was just his vibe. He knew how to integrate his characters with his settings, and he knew how to give people that crowd pleasing energy of action that's not overbearing. It's an adventure, it's not a pure action thriller. He went for adventure, not the thrill ride per se, really
Mm.
integrating his characters into it. Mangold doesn't have that in his body. It's not in his genes to do that, that he's shown with the work in the past. And even when we see all the characters traveling from one area to another, they're dragging their feet. And by that time, we don't care where they go. It's one scene shot. It almost runs like a PowerPoint presentation between scenes. Is they
Yeah.
might as well go on a commercial jet, have a meal, have a drink, because we care just as much. They can go to each location, but there's nothing that makes those locations unique. There's nothing special about it. They could have stayed in one location and it would have had the same effect as this movie.
So the scene that actually worked the most for me, it was actually there's two of them that actually worked for me. One is when they bring in sudden Antonio Banderas,
Mhm.
which I'm really disappointed it actually wasn't the boat guy from the first movie. I forget that person's name. When he says like, "Oh, I know a guy with a big beautiful boat," I thought it was going to be that guy. You know, the
Yeah.
whole like the guy who was getting them out and then the Nazis capture him. And I actually felt that sequence from getting on the boat to Indy showing humanity by talking about if he could travel back in time, what would he do? And he talks about his relationship with Marion and Mutt and his regrets.
Hmm.
That worked.
Yeah.
And then you had an unusual scene for an Indiana Jones film, which is they went scuba diving to this old Roman wreck, and that was actually I like that. It was
I
fun.
did. I enjoyed that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sure the eels, the kid goes, eels, they look like big snakes. It's like we get it, dude. But that worked. And when they actually get the dial together and go through the portal, the sky portal, I was like, okay, are we gonna have like Indy meet up with Indy and old Indy and young Indy are gonna defeat Nazis again? Cause that's kind of fun. That's kind of
That would be
weird.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, that would kind of work. I mean, do a little Back to the Future 2 here. Yeah, okay. And then the Roman history nut in me smiled because there was ballista and there were trebuchets and there was Greek fire and there was Romans and there was Greeks and it's the Battle of Syracuse and Archimedes there. I did not see the giant claws picking up boats, but I was like, this works for me. I don't know why the hell you have you have a Nazi bomber that can fly at 15,000 feet, flying at 4 feet above the ground, getting shot by ballista repeatedly. I don't know why you're doing that, but I liked it. Go ahead.
Well, we take that. So I'll start with the shipwreck or the eel scene. Keep in mind, this is the scene that has the most adventure to it. It's the one scene change that really takes us to something different that we haven't really seen. And it's the only scene that probably it's not even Indiana Jones in in the scuba suit, it's stunt doubles or CGI, whatever it may be. And it's the one scene that has the least spoken words, but it works because it has that identity of adventure. It has that one thing that the audience hasn't experienced. And then we get up on the boat where we have that fantastic conversation, that mesmerizing conversation
Oh yes.
with Dr. Voller or Mads Mikkelsen with Indy, where his mannerisms, his body language, it's like a comforting, and then it goes into an intensity. It's a roller coaster of a conversation that I really did enjoy that scene. But
Mhm.
again, that's where Harrison Ford takes a step back and doesn't do too much. So a lot of the great scenes we have doesn't even involve Indiana Jones per se. And when we get into the ending, and I think I told you after I saw it, I am torn by it and I am still torn to date on it. And I'm still trying to debate how I'm going to write it in my review, is I'm not sure about it yet. To a point, I think they rushed it a little bit. I think
Oh
I wish
yeah,
I would
that
have
was
liked
quick.
more. Yeah. And I would have liked a little bit more context so it felt earned.
Yes.
But right when they go through it, your brain shuts off and you kind of just take in that scenery. I'm looking from edge of the screen to edge of the screen,
Mhm.
enjoying that. It looks fantastic. And whether or not it makes sense, they kind of go all in with that sci fi thing that kind of was their kryptonite in Crystal Skull,
Mhm.
but they kind of tweaked it a little bit and they put some emotion behind it. And it is to an extent an emotional scene that kind of gets ruined with a sucker punch. But you know what? There is a lot of emotional elements to it.
It kind of reminded me like Jason and the Argonauts. Was
Mm,
it Harry? Dang, I can't think of his name. The stop motion creator who did a lot of the like Jason and the Argonauts and some of the other movies of the
Hmm.
60s and 70s where you had
Yeah.
like dinosaurs and stuff like that. It kind of reminded me of that, like, that which of what I suspect they were trying to aim for by setting it in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it really did work for me. But there's an episode of Doctor Who where my wife and I we love Doctor Who, and we knew one of the companions was leaving, but then something happened. And the companion decided to stay, anyways. But it was a Christmas special with Nick Frost, and he's Santa. She and the companion Clara is traveling with Santa. They're delivering presents and some other stuff, and basically she decides to stay with it, even though like it's kind of like this memory void kind of thing where if you stay there you're gonna die kind of thing. Where she's having so much fun after all the stress and struggles of being with the doctor, and her own life was kind of like in shambles, and all this other stuff about her companionship that's kind of weird.
Hmm.
She just riding with Santa, delivering presents and kind of falling asleep in his arms, and that's where she wants to be.
Mm.
And then they undo it with a reshoot in the last like 30 seconds. And wife and I were like, we thought that was the end because we heard that the companion was thinking about leaving. This would probably be their final episode, and we couldn't help but think like if you've been traveling through time and space and your life is terrible, and you get this moment to be with Santa and just deliver
Mm.
presents and fall asleep in his arms, and that's your ending. That is a comfort. And I thought that's what they were going to kind of do with having
Yeah.
Indy just embrace this is the end. And I've seen he's all his young Indiana Jones adventures, all his other ones, all this stuff. And I thought he was just going to be like, I'm seeing what I teach and I'm seeing the world and this is okay.
Yeah.
And I don't buy her explanation that whole like, oh, you're creating a paradox. There's a crashed Nazi plane 100 feet away from you.
Right. I don't think a hat and jacket's gonna make that big of a difference.
No.
Like,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, and I totally agree. I think that's what I thought they were going for. But right when she says that, I can understand, people tearing it apart afterwards of saying, "Yeah, you couldn't have done that." But then you take the Nazi plane, like you said. But obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously. I've been surprised before, but there probably is not going to be another Indiana Jones. I mean, they've said it
yeah.
before. I mean, it's pretty after this one, I would imagine. That would have been a better bittersweet ending for me, where
Hmm.
you have the hero, the man who spent his entire life running and searching, kind of just lay rest to the
Hmm.
past. And I think that would have been a very fantastic symbolic gesture to Harrison Ford and to the character. But then we get into the ending, which I think people would have really missed, is the Marion cameo.
Yeah. That
So
was really beautiful.
yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I think they gave up one thing to introduce another, and I think if they tried to fit her into something else in that movie, it just wouldn't work. It would feel too thrown in and too forced. So I think they had to give up that ending to get a more another satisfying one for fans.
I think you're right. So, as we kind of wind down and wrap up here, I have two little nitpicks. One, the last shot should have just been the hat. Him snatching the hat off the line, I don't get it.
Yeah, that's stupid.
Apparently, he likes to wear the hat while getting intimate with his wife because that's what was happening. And then they kind of pan away from it and then he grabs the hat. But Mads Mikkelsen is the scariest motherfucker on the planet, right?
His looks alone, he doesn't have to say much. It's just his mere facial and body language that's just creepy as hell that makes a perfect villain.
Oh, the scene with him talking to the butler in
Yes,
the that was just derogatory and painful.
it made me squirm in my seat.
He's not even saying, he's thinking bad things,
Right.
but he's not saying it. He's just kind of the way he's wording it to that presumably African American person is very uncomfortable, especially since he's a Nazi and he's a Nazi who is being celebrated today because he got us to the moon.
Well, and that's the scariest piece of it too. Is you take this Nazi that has access to the White House. You have this hateful man, and I think we talked about it before. Is this man that wanted to be better than Hitler? How
Yeah,
terrifying is that?
that is his whole story. Is he wants to get the Dial of Destiny to go back to 1939, kill Hitler, yay,
That's a plus.
to do a better job.
That's a bad.
That's the bad part. Mads, I don't know if he ever throws a punch in this movie. What is also scary about it is that the boat scene you were talking about, which is a great scene. It's where Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Wombat is what Indy calls her. Her name's Helena Shaw. She gets this kind of inspired. She gets these moments where she's talking about they're deciphering this language together. He's doing these intellectual leaps with her, and you do like, and it is kind of, it's weird because Harrison, as you said, he stepped back. He's not really doing much, and it's the two of them, Mads Mikkelsen and Wombat, doing the puzzle solving together.
Yeah.
And it's almost endearing because she's kind of leading him along, waiting for like people to answer questions. He's answering them, and it's almost like, oh, he is a smart guy. He actually is kind of charming. He's a horrible Nazi, whose henchman every scene must start off with henchman walks into the room, shoots an innocent civilian.
Well, and that's about that Nazi control too. They want to make sure that he's the one in control and he's the one giving the orders. That shows the amount of power he has. He has his own he has his own henchmen to do all that for him. He's just a scientist, and like that just shows the amount of control he has. And when we're in that safe scene where they're going back and forth, offering the cigarette, smoking, I think the little details in that to really make which is odd, and I hate saying this, but making the audience feel comfortable between a Nazi and Wombat, we have that sense of comfort in the hands of a Nazi. And if the filmmakers can make the audience feel that comfort, that is smart when it comes to the dialogue and performance of Mads. And I put more credit to Mads than I do the actual script because there's not a lot there other than factual dialogue.
Yes, I think this movie's about 2.5 hours long. I think if it was about a brisk 210, maybe they can nudge it down to like 159, cut off some of the action sequences, narrow down the beginning a little bit. I mean, some of the stuff was just a little bit like, look what we can do.
Yeah.
I think it's a tighter script that could work more and extend that ancient Rome battle by maybe 5 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
I think you can reach something a little bit better. But at this point, it's a pass, man. I just wait till Disney Plus.
Yeah, I mean, with me, I'm gonna kind of go along the same lines. I mean, the title makes sense to me. I mean, the Dial of Destiny, halfway through, I kept looking at my clock to see when it was going to be over. So I'm pretty sure the filmmakers had that same kind of idea when creating the title of how we're going to respond to it. And I'm pretty sure most of the people in my screening were checking their watches to see how much more we had to sit through this piece of crap. But pass for me.
To quote you, a verdict has been given. So I think we should both go get another solid drink, put on Raiders, and enjoy the rest of our evening.
Absolutely.
Avengers!
Oh, crap, that is the wrong button.
You can't cut that out either now, Alex.
Nope. So I'm going to say if you want to follow Josh and all his injuries, you can follow him at Josh_Scar and at Talking Smack Pod. You can join our Discord at tsmackpod@gmail.com. I want to thank you to Leo Allen for our musical themes, Beppo and Ritual Aos Studio for avatars. I'd like to let you guys know that the theme music this week is actually done by AI John Williams, which could do a better score than what we got. And of course, Justin Henson from the Movie Wire.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for suffering through this with me.
My pleasure.
Your podcast is a joy to listen to, and I was shocked by some of the movies that you thought were the best and the worst this year on your most recent episode.
Oh, can't wait to hear your input on it.
Well, the music's getting too loud for me to do anything about that.
Darn.
I'm really tempted not to edit this episode at all.
Yeah, I think it was pretty spot on.
I'm just gonna. Josh was like, "Hey, did you edit it?"
Sure did.
By editing it, you mean I converted it to an MP3? My favorite part of this is that we can hear each other pretty well.
Yeah.
But when you actually mix it all together, you can't hear shit right now.
Oh. So I can say like Josh is faking it and he won't hear it?
Oh yeah, Josh
Oh.
is totally faking it.
Yo.
Oh yeah.
I love Crystal Skull.
All right, since I know we both got to go quickly, objectively, I'm gonna say Raiders, Last Crusade, probably Dio, Tomb Crystal.
Mm. So the only reason I put Last Crusade above is Raiders. I could not stand the lack of music in a lot of the action scenes. I think
Okay.
like it just kind of during like that chase in the village, it needed something. But the original is my number 2, just because the way they wrote the original character and it was at its raw state was number 2. And then I'd go Temple of Doom, Crystal Skull, and of course this one.
It's kind of like the Matrix. It's a little bit of diminishing returns, but you have your moments.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
hands down the first 3, of course.
Cool. All right. Good night, Justin.
All right, good night. Thanks for having me.
Of course.